Hi, I'm Sravish. This is Trust Talks, a series celebrating companies and people who are transforming GRC into a trusted and revenue generating function. Today, I have with me Aaron Kirkpatrick, the CISO of Venminder, a security leader who downs monster drinks to squash security incidents all over the world. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sravish, for having me. I am excited to talk about GRC and the industry overall.
Absolutely. Aaron, I've been told that you are not a big fan of documents and policies when it comes to GRCs, and rather you want evidence and controls. Why is that?
There's a lot of ways that you can, show compliance for your industry or for your organization, and show compliance for those controls. And documentation is one way to do that, but documents can also become stale as well. And you can always write a document, or someone within the organization has written a document, but is that document being updated and followed by all of those other teams as well? Has it been communicated? Since the 3 years has passed by since that it was originally created. So, when you're looking at assessing an organization or doing your own compliance activities, policy isn't enough. You really need to be able to show some concrete evidence of the implementation of that control.
I always joke around, Aaron, that policies in many companies are like your New Year's resolutions. I'm going to sleep well, I'm going to eat well, I'm going to exercise every day. But if you don't have the evidence of it, then you're not really meeting your New Year's resolutions every day.
A lot of people write their policies as aspirational instead of what is occurring in the organization today and what you can actually show that you're doing. And I think that's also another big issue of, being able to actually prove that you're doing what you say you're doing within those policies.
Yep. Speaking of how to prove in the organization, I've always asked folks like you that we often struggle with getting security programs and GRC programs funded. And a big part of why that is very often both senior management as well as the rest of the company doesn't really understand why we are doing a GRC program and what is the impact of the GRC program. So how do we make GRC more accessible, more current, and more fundable in organizations?
Yeah, I really think that you kind of have to start at how can GRC provide value to the organization overall? Because, a lot of people see GRC and the activities that, we do as, being kept in that small team or that single person or that group of departments, depending on your organization size. And, really from a GRC perspective, if you can show value, I think that just leads down the path of transparency in those operations and then the accountability as well, because now you're being transparent about what you're saying and actually doing to back that up.
And what are 3 or 4 or 5 practical tips you would give emerging CISOs and startups or growing organizations of how do they do that? How do they showcase the value of GRC to the rest of the organization?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways that you can do that. So, from an internal facing perspective, you could look at, how do you currently not only monitor, but to go back a step, how do you document your control environment today? Then how do you monitor that control environment? How do you know what controls you're supposed to have in place, either per, regulatory industry guidance or customer commitments as well? And to be able to track all of those controls in one place and to be able to know whether they're operating effectively as well throughout your, implementation of them is really going to be valuable from not only an internal perspective of proving compliance, but, also enabling the business to further grow in their compliance opportunities as, if you can easily map your controls to one regulation, do a gap assessment against another regulation to potentially show, some growth to your customers, or, just, have more certifications or audits, under your belt to provide that assurance, provide that trust externally. And then from an external facing perspective on, providing that value or showing that value, think about your sales and marketing teams. Marketing wants to talk about the business, what the business is doing, and how we're differentiating our offerings versus everybody else. One way that, I see organizations doing that is, by putting out, these are our commitments to our customers, in a trust page, or, looking at just general customer commitment pages as well. So, that's going to give you a better look from an external perspective. But then from a sales perspective, once you're able to use that marketing perspective to draw people in, you can then say, here's all this due diligence information that I have on myself, and show the maturity of your program, because you know that those requests are going to be coming in. To have that prepared and ready, again, just shows maturity and then enables further trust through that process.
I love that. How do you showcase your security and privacy posture as not only a differentiator internally for the business, but also a differentiator with your customers, so that you can support winning more deals faster? And I think that's a phenomenal way to think about it. Aaron, you've answered a fair set of security questionnaires in your life.
I have.
When the salesperson tells you on a Friday morning, here's a 500 question questionnaire, I'd like it by Friday night, please, what goes through your mind when that happens?
Sometimes those situations occur. Who knows? Every situation is a little bit different on, how that situation became to be where it was at. But, it's a tough spot to be in, especially if you're, a small team, a team of one, and you can't, split out that massive questionnaire against multiple people to answer that. And, you really just have to go through and work through the best you can on completing those, because if you're that far in the deadline, you can't go back and, say, hey, I've got these standardized questionnaires already completed, like the CAKE or the SIG or the HECVAT, or one of the other offerings from Google or anybody else. And, say, hey, I'll give you this instead, as well as an audit report maybe, versus, filling out that custom questionnaire with 500 questions that are on it.
And what advice do you have for startups that are that one-person shop, or maybe they don't even have a CISO, but they've only got a CTO or a VP of engineering, and you've been asked to answer the security questionnaire? What advice do you have for them on how to do that well?
Yeah, and the thing is, you have to think about how often you're going to be doing these, and the answer is pretty often, or you want to be doing them pretty often, because it's a positive sign for your business. You have them coming in, and so I think you just really need to be prepared as you go through that. And as you're starting that process and answering those questionnaires, retain those questionnaires. Don't get rid of them. Try to then use those questionnaires to build a database of frequently asked questions and your responses. You're going to get better consistency of those responses and just better responses overall if you've already written up, your outline for how to respond to a request like that. I think I'd also recommend just having like those standardized questionnaires I mentioned earlier ready, and pushing back as having those as an option for your due diligence package, and hoping that you can just respond to the informational requests from that customer or prospect instead of unstandardized questionnaire sets coming in.
Yeah. I mean, one thought I've always had is how can I present to the customer early on in the sales process a piece of content that tells them I'm actually transparently and comprehensively sharing with you more information that you're ever going to ask me in any security questionnaire you send me. And you almost put the customer on notice that, look, I'm extremely open, transparent, and I have more than what you're ever going to ask me. So please don't send me a security questionnaire because you can self-serve anything you want to know about me in this portal.
Yeah, and that's how we approach it. As a third-party risk management organization, we want to be an example of, if we're an organization like us, what should you be, providing to your customers, your prospects, from a due diligence and ongoing monitoring perspective.
Yeah. And when you, as a third-party management, as a third-party organization that is looking at vendor risk, and that's what Venminder does, are there any red flags that you see when you evaluate vendors, or if you see common pitfalls that vendors fall into when they're presenting information to you?
I guess what annoys me about that process sometimes is when a vendor, especially a larger vendor, doesn't provide you with holistic information about their control environment. It seems like they're hiding aspects of their control environment where, if you're going through the effort and expense of going through a SOC audit or another type of external audit, if you've got good results in that, you should be proud of that. You should want to share, how well you've done with implementing your controls inside your own internal control environment. So I guess that's kind of really an annoyance of, well, why won't you answer this questionnaire, or why don't you give us this documentation instead, or either or, give us something that, your customers and prospects can evaluate your control environment on, versus just saying, we're the big player in this space. That's what you get. Move on if, you don't agree with what we gave you.
Yeah, there's definitely a holier than thou attitude in this entire industry, and people are extremely cagey. And once they reach a point of scale, they feel like they're better than everybody. And the irony is, these are the companies that end up getting breaches, and these are the companies that end up on the front page of the New York Times. And there's a discrepancy in this industry.
Yeah, and to me, those organizations should likely have those resources to complete those standardized questionnaires and keep them maintained and up to date. So, you should be requesting the same of your customers, if you're in that same environment. Standardize on what you're asking for and use an industry standard.
In addition to security questionnaires, SOC 2 is a very common requirement nowadays in B2B enterprise sales. If you're selling software to a large company, they often want you to either have a SOC 2 attestation or an ISO 27001 certification. It's usually one or the other. But in spite of you making the investment and getting those attestations or certifications, they still make you answer a security questionnaire. Don't we trust auditors to do the right thing? Why are we still asking for security questionnaires?
I completely agree. And, it's not, just the ISOs and SOC 2s, but, if you even go larger to like the high trusts, and looking at how in depth some of these audits are that are performed by third parties, if you're not trusting the work from someone that actually reviewed the outputs of those of the implementation of those controls, then what's reviewing a questionnaire response? What's the value in a yes to this item versus an auditor looked at the output from the system, interviewed the person implementing or in charge of that control, and saw the documentation around that. Why can't you accept that instead of asking those 300 questions with 120 of those being covered on a SOC?
I love that statement you just made. What's the value of a yes? That's great. I once heard a friend of mine on a similar call. He said, Friends don't send friends security questionnaires. And we put that on a t-shirt, and our customers love wearing that t-shirt. I'm going to come up with a version of what's the value of a yes, because I think that's the same. It's the same irony. It's like, you literally ask me to say yes or no, and you have no way to verify if I'm telling you the truth or not.
And the interviewee, has the motivation to say yes, to respond positively, in any way that they potentially can.
That's right. It's an open book test where I know the answer you want to hear, and I'm supposed to give you the answer you want to hear. Otherwise, I'm going to lose this deal. And there's no way to verify the statements I'm making in these documents.
Exactly. And I love the, friends don't send friends security questionnaires, as a concept overall. I mean, again, if you've got audit reports or, solid documentation, that's really where, solid due diligence can be performed, or at least a standardized questionnaire.
Yep. And speaking of compliance attestations and reports, you've been through your share of SOC 2s. Any tips and tricks you have for young companies that are pursuing their first SOC 2 Type 1 or Type 2? What are some best practices they should put in place?
I have in with multiple different organizations, and, take advantage and do a readiness assessment before you go through that first real audit period with your auditors. I mean, it enables you to not only get to know your auditors a little bit better, but to explore how they're going to be assessing your controls. So there's no surprises, when you go through that audit for for real that first time. And so readiness assessments is one big aspect there, I think, is important for new organizations going down that path. Another is, you're designing the controls that you're going to be audited against with SOC 2s or SOC 1s. And, you want to show growth within your control environment, not only to yourselves, but to your customers as well. They might not be paying attention, but you can still do it. And you also so related to that, you might want to start more generic with your control activities that you outline to initially comply with for your first or second audit period. And as you become more confident in how those items controls are going to be audited, add some specificity into those control activities, which really, I think, just enriches the value of a SOC report, because not all SOC reports are created equally, not even close. I mean, that's why you have 35-page SOC reports and 735-page SOC reports. There's a big difference in the amount of information you're going to be able to, glean from those.
How do we get budget for pursuing a SOC 2 Type 2? CEO comes to you and says, we need SOC 2. How do you create a budget plan?
Yeah, a lot of times it's the CEO's coming to you because you're losing sales. They're hearing from the salespeople that, hey, we're losing our sales to a competitor that has this audit, or, these organizations don't want to sign with us because we don't have an external audit performed on us. And, obviously the SOC 2 in the US is, going to be the most popular option there. So I think for most organizations, it's a sales-driven requirement.
Aaron, I love how thoughtful you are in your answers and how practical you are in your answers. Surely you've learned a bunch from other people. You've been inspired by other people in your career, in your journey. Some are colleagues, some are mentors, some are bosses. Who in your journey in this field of security have you seen as a champion of trust? Somebody you've looked up to and said, this person is a trust champion. They motivate me to be better, and that's why I am who I am. Who's played a big role in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think back to my earlier career of why I am the way I am today, and why I'm doing what I do today. And I really have to credit my ability to be here to people like Mark Stewart and Mark Kittrell from a business perspective of how are we going to grow this data center company and show compliance and security and get our audits in line to better our sales process with these big organizations coming to this small little organization that's providing co-location space. Or people like John Rath, who, initially introduced me to, something as simple as like ISO 9001 standardization, and, why things like that are important from a document management perspective internally. And he also exposed me to SAS 70s. Back when I first started this process, the precursor to SOC reports. And so, going through those initial SAS 70 audits and defining our control environment and learning from him, as well as the auditors. I was really fortunate to have some great auditors to work with to help me through those processes for a young organization and someone early in their career to, how do we make this better? What's the right path to go down, to implement these controls to be audited against. There's also, instructors. I go back to college and, people like Todd Bangan and, just being able to know how to implement those technical controls. I now know them as controls. Back then, it was just, configurations in technology products. So that's all really led me to where I am today of, I just really enjoy control environments, and, everything that goes into that, and that comes out of that as well.
We have to get you a coffee mug that says, "I love controls," Aaron.
I'll put it up on the display shelf.
I love it. Aaron, one last question before we sign off. If you could get on a DeLorean and travel at 88 miles an hour and go out into the future 10 years from now or 20 years from now, and you're looking back at where we are today, what do you think we'd be doing very differently from a security standpoint or a GRC standpoint or a privacy standpoint, where you would look back at the status quo today and said, boy, we were so antiquated in the way we did X, Y, or Z? What would be X, Y, or Z in your mind?
The first thing that comes to mind is, I guess related to third-party risk management, because that's where I'm, focused most of the time. And, it comes down to, how do vendors represent their control environments? We talked about questionnaires and audit reports, and really the whole point of those is to demonstrate that you can be trusted by your customers. And, to do that, there's just got to be a better way than what we're doing today with, SOC audits are great, but they don't cover everything far enough in depth for a lot of organizations, especially higher risk and critical organizations. And, there's that adjustment of scope with different criteria to choose from. And you can also, so I just really feel like you've got to have some way, and I hope, down in the future, we're going to have that insight that's, publicly available or behind a licensing, portal of some kind to show a confidence level, a trust level in a vendor's or any organization's control environment for the controls that matter to that service that they're offering. I think, Dan Walsh, one of your prior guests, said it really well. Having a trust exchange, having companies listed with ratings that are continuously monitored and updated. To me, that's a great example of something I hope exists, years down the road. I know we're not near that today, but I think there are people making the steps to bring us eventually to that point.
I love it. From your words, from your mouth to the GRC God's ears. I really, really hope that happens. We live in a world where I don't have to take your trust posture at face value. I can actually go click a button and verify that you're doing what you're saying you're doing. That would be awesome.
Exactly.
Aaron, you've been a phenomenal guest. Thank you so much for joining me at Trust Talks today.
That's been great. Thank you for having me. And I hope to, continue our conversations around GRC in the future.
Thank you, Aaron.